Getting onto the first question then. This could be a very broad question. In the book, you are referenced as the PPV person, Pillars, Pipelines, and Vaults. So, how do you use Notion?
Okay, so PPV, Pillars, Pipelines, and Vaults, is the system I've developed and that I teach. It's a comprehensive life operating system. So I use Notion in a vast range of ways. I manage my whole life with it. It's not the only software app I use, of course, but it's the backbone. It's the operating system. And then there are lots of satellite pieces that orbit around it. But I massively leverage Notion. And I do that because it's uniquely capable of being massively leveraged. To me, Notion is a development platform where you can build your own SaaS app, which is remarkable. I mean, this is a new generation of app. That's why I went so fully into it, because it is so expansive in what it can do. So I use it to run my actions, and I use it to run my knowledge management. Those are the two big components. And then sort of a subcomponent is habits and identity sculpting, which is something that I do extensively as well. So I guess those would be the three categories, but those are very, very broad categories. And with the action part, let's start with that. That's perhaps the most involved. That is identifying what I value most in life, what brings life meaning to me. That's a process. I have Notion pages and systems that I use to dig into that and to revisit that on a regular basis and to remind myself and systematically bring myself back to that periodically, because we change over time. And then I take that high level self-awareness and channel that down into my life aspirations. Given what I value most in life, what do I want to actually achieve in life? What are my highest level aspirations? And then I channel that down to actionable goals, like goals that are measurable, trackable. You can know whether you've accomplished them or not. And then we break those down into either habits and routines that advance those goals, or projects that advance those goals. And this is across my business life. This is across my personal life. It's really across everything. And then, of course, projects we break down into tasks, and then tasks we flow into a very focused, very streamlined view of what I need to do today, hour by hour. So we literally have our hour by hour actions mapped to my highest level aspirations. And that's something I never had before implementing this kind of system. I would do goals, life aspirations, goals for the year. I'd write them down, I'd put them in a drawer, or I'd put them in Evernote. And then if I was lucky, I'd see them 6 to 12 months later. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, right. I remember that. That's nowhere near where I am now. So I would just drift away from them. That's natural. We all do it, even if you take the time to write them down, which most people don't. So this system very tangibly connects my day-to-day hourly actions with my highest level aspirations in life. So that's the action side. Knowledge management, something that you know very well. That is where we capture the flood of information coming in. We curate what matters most to us. We put it into the system so that we have access to it. But in most cases, once again, we forget about what we captured. And when I did this in Evernote, when I've done this in other systems, I just lost track of it. The unique thing about Notion, and what I've massively tried to leverage in the PPV system, is resurfacing in context. So once you capture the information, and you shouldn't capture everything, but you do a curated capture. Once you capture it, it resurfaces in context. So if I'm working on a project, I have a view of everything related to that project, including all the media I've captured, all the notes I've entered, my own thoughts, any distillation of information, all resurfaces in that project. If I'm working on a client, I have a page for each client, everything related to that client, including all of the media, knowledge, thoughts, ideas, all is resurfacing in that dashboard for that client. Same thing for each piece of content. Every aspect of my life has an element, a dashboard in Notion, and every part of the knowledge management system and process will resurface in that context, which is something that never happened on any other system. And then habits and routines, we're designing how we spend our days and our hours, what we want to do consistently, so we get that compounding effect. This Notion system it puts guardrails and keeps me on track for those things. It makes it very obvious when I'm off track. And then it gives me a little bit of an incentive through this tracking and the reward of seeing the consistency visually. It brings me back on track. So that's quite a bit. I mean, each of those is a broad category, but together it's so massively valuable. And I talk a lot about systems thinking. This is the systems thinking approach, that each component has value in and of itself, but when you combine them, there is an exponential increase in the value where each part fuels the other part because they're interconnected and informing each other.
So I heard a lot of stuff in there, a lot of things that I want to sort of explore a little bit further. What the first thing that comes to mind when so going back to actions, you said hour by hour. Do you time block inside of Notion with that sort of hour by hour, or is it a running list? Like, how does that those actions work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it varies depending on certain stages I'm in. And when I teach it, it also depends on the person. So I actually will waver between the different process, the different approaches. So I'll explain both of them. It's sort of one end and then the other end, and then there's some gradients in the middle. But if you understand the two ends, you'll get the sense. So the most casual, although it's still more formal than most people, is, Notion is resurfacing the priorities in my life, the things I need to do day by day. So when we have tasks that are fueling our projects, I'm assigning a due date, a DO date, which is not the date it needs to be completed by, it's the date to do it, the date on which I'm doing the action. And I'm scheduling that. And the result of that is I have a mini to-do list for each day. If a day becomes unrealistic in its length, you have to move some further down. The night before, I set the priority list for the following day, and it has to be viable. It can be a reach, but it has to be realistic. Most of us who do to-do lists, and certainly how I did it previously, was this endless to-do list that was just impossible. It was just a fantasy, a dream list, really. But if you have a smaller list that's actually viable, you have a shot at doing it. And it's incredibly rewarding when you finish it. So you're going to put the effort in to try to finish it. You don't always, but you're going to, if it seems realistic, you're going to make more of a dent than if it's just hopeless. So you have a realistic to-do list for each day, and you're constantly shuffling that out and refining it throughout the week as you go. So that's going to bring clarity to what you need to do each day. Now, that's not time blocking, but that's very explicit prioritizing. Then in the more casual scenario, I also use Google Calendar, and I think you still need a calendar app. Notion doesn't replace a calendar app, largely just because the automations, the calendar invites, and the things that are triggering and showing up when other people invite you to things. And there are ways to get this into Notion, but it's clumsy and it's not two-way and it's not sufficient really yet. It will be sooner or later, but so you need a calendar app. So on my calendar app is anything that has a time. It's scheduled specifically at a time. Now, most people, for that means anything that they're scheduling with other people, but we are terrible at keep living up to the commitments we make to ourselves. Yet we're very good at living up to obligations to meet with other people. So one of the things I really encourage, and I do myself, is I will schedule time inside my calendar for myself, for my highest priority work. I call them action zones in the calendar. My action zone in the Notion system is the daily, what I need to do today and only today. And then in the calendar, I will block off action zones. And during that time, this is uninterrupted deep work, essentially. I'll have at least 1 hour, usually 2 or 3 hours, and then multiple ones, hopefully throughout the day. And during those windows, I will go to my Notion priority list in my action zone in Notion that I've scheduled for the day, and I will do what it takes to get those things done. Now, that's the more casual approach. In the more, sometimes I find I'm not living up to my commitments to myself. I'm not actually implementing. Then I take it to the more intense approach, which is full-time blocking. In that case, the night before, when I'm mapping out my priorities in Notion, I will then also literally map out hour by hour through the day and what's going to happen. But now I'm going to be clustering things together. So I'll group a bunch of habits. I'll bundle a bunch of habits together, and that'll be my morning routine. I'll have a midday routine, evening routine. So I'm not doing every little thing, but I'll have windows to do types of things, all of which are either scheduled with someone else or prioritized in my Notion system. So some people can get by on this more casual approach, and some people need this, especially if they're working towards a strict deadline or an objective they set as a very high priority for themselves. So I will go back and forth. I'll typically do the more casual approach, but sometimes where I need to instill more discipline on myself, I will actually do the full-time blocking. But either way, it's being informed by my Notion priority list. And then to the extent it's being actually scheduled, it's in the calendar.
Right. Okay. I think that's a good segue actually to the next question, which was what's your processes around task lists and calendar? So you've just explored you using Google Calendar. Is that a back end thing that you schedule things on, or do you use another app with Google Calendar or Notion, API integrations. Could you explore that a bit?
Sure. Let me start with the end there. I have used Notion API integrations. I've stopped using it. It's just, it's first of all, you can set it up. I have a YouTube video on this, and it explains how to set it up. It's a bit clumsy. It takes 3 different apps. You have to be on a paid plan, which I am already, so it doesn't matter to me. But for a lot of people, that's an issue. And so you can set it up so that anything you add or change in your Google Calendar will be updated in Notion, which is great. Now, it does not work the other way. You cannot update in Notion, have it updated in the calendar. So you just have to have the workflow that all calendar modifications will be done in the calendar app, whether it's Google Calendar or an app that's synced with it. And so I was doing that. It works, but it's a bit clumsy, and periodically it has issues. So I've actually just stopped doing that. It just wasn't worth the effort, though it does work for long periods of time, and then you have to tweak. So it depends on what your priorities are. But so now I'm not using the API for that at all. There is this announcement that Notion is going to roll out some kind of native integration with Google Calendar. It's a little unclear exactly what it's going to do, but I'm hopeful that that's going to give us true two-way sync. The way Todoist and Google Calendar have sync. Like, that's great. That's what we need. And so I'm hopeful that's coming. Regardless, I am not using the API for that anymore, though you can largely do it. So I'm jumping back and forth. Sometimes I go into the Google Calendar app directly in the browser. I used to do that even 6 months ago. That was my primary way of doing it. I've now since started using a team email software that has Calendar built in, and it's synced with Google Calendar. It's called Front. It's fantastic, but it's a team thing. Like, you would never get this for yourself, but it's really good for team coordination, team discussions in chat threads, in between emails, assigning responses to different people. We have a lot of customer service, email channels and chat bots on our chat, customer service chat on our websites and inside our program dashboard. So all of this comes into one place. So this is something that a small company would use, not an individual. But because it has a really nice calendar interface in it, at this point, I'm using that. But it's essentially just synced with Google Calendar.
Right. Okay. So, kind of an expansion on your task list. You mentioned habits and actions. Are they all in your task list, or are they separate lists that you deem to do different times? Because obviously there are the philosophies of eat the frog, do one task, 3 task priorities, loads of different methodologies around it. So, how do you approach habits and actions or tasks?
Yeah, great question. So their habits and tasks are separate. They're not in the same list because habits are routines. Tasks are things that are unique and you need to check the list to see what they are. Habits don't need to be. They're not unique. They're by definition habits, or they're recurring events. In fact, typically what we call habits aren't really habits. They're routines that we're trying to make habits. But we'll call them habits since that's typically what they're referred to. So the action zone is going to list my tasks, which I call action items, and those are prioritized, and those are synced all the way to my highest level aspirations through the different tiers of the system. Habits are designed in one area. There's a habits and routines database where you set your intention. You say, these are going to be my habits that I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to make a commitment to do these. This is the time of day. This is the frequency. This is the group that they're bundled with. Because again, bundling habits helps you do them, especially if you can attach them to one that you're already doing easily, regularly. For example, lunch, or even just waking up. You can attach, those are things you're going to do, right? So then if you attach meditation, I'll do meditation first thing after lunch, and it's part of a bundle. Anything like that you can bundle helps you do them, especially when there's an anchor habit that's already established. So there's a database to set the intention. And then we have our daily tracking database where for the ones that we care most about and are having the hardest time implementing, we track them and we track how successfully we're doing them. So in the window on my action zone dashboard, which is my focus daily dashboard, I've got my tasks, which is in order, prioritized and labeled in the priority. And immediately under that, I have the habit tracking. So I've got the reminder of the habit tracking, but I'm typically doing them at the same time each day, which is the best way to do it, to get into that natural rhythm. And so I've got a window where I see both, but they are actually in 2 separate places. And then the daily tracking database, which is the one that has the habit tracker, also opens into a full page, of course, like everything in Notion. And then at the top is the morning routine. And then there are the habits that I do through the day. And then there's the end of day routine. So the morning is it's a morning startup and an end of day wind down. The morning startup will be a bundle of habits that I do together. I enter my sleep data. I do a visualization practice. I do a mindset practice. These are all like 2 minutes each. So it's quick. But there's a startup. And then there's a wind down at the end of the day where I evaluate my day. I say, okay, what percent of the things of the time that I plan to spend on these things did I actually spend on those things? And then what percent of the things that I plan to complete did I actually complete? So those are two different things. Where did I spend the time that I intended to spend the time? And what did I complete that I intended to complete? Between the two, the time allocation is more important. If you're spending the time properly, the outcomes will take care of themselves. But it also gives you a sense of whether you're being realistic at the outcomes given the time. So if you lived up to your time allocation, but you didn't get nearly as much done, if that happens over and over, you're going to realize you're unrealistic about the time it takes to do certain things. So you're just learning about yourself as you do that. But so there's a window that presents all of this, but they are actually two separate lists.
Right. Again, I think that's another great segue to the next question, which is how do you stay on track daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, etc. I know in your series on YouTube, you've done a video on your review, and I'm familiar with your dashboards of reviews and tracking of all of the things that you have inside of Notion. So can you just walk us through how that works on a section basis?
Yeah, so these are the actions and processes daily, what I just discussed. And then we have our review cycles. So I have weekly reviews, monthly reviews, quarterly reviews. Now that sounds like a lot, but keep in mind that the quarterly review actually reduces the load on the monthly review twice so basically you're just offloading things from the monthly review that otherwise would be in the monthly review. So the quarterly review actually simplifies the monthly review. So the weekly review, I'm primarily reviewing of my active projects, and we're trying to minimize the number of active projects. So a lot of us have all these projects, but we make hardly any progress month after month after month. So the objective here is to have a very small number of projects that we're actually committing ourselves to and making meaningful progress on regularly. And then when those are done, then we activate a replacement for those. And so you have a small number that you're moving consistently on instead of a large number that you're barely moving at all on. And in this process of reviewing weekly, of the ones that are set to active, what tasks need to be done to advance that? Now, any active project must at all times have at least one active task assigned to it. Again, we're assigning due dates, DO dates. So there's a specific day you intend to do something. An active task is a date set to active and has a DO due date. In the project, you'll queue up future tasks, but only one or two or three will be active. It doesn't make sense to have 8 active. You can only do one at a time. So queue up the next one, and then you have a sequence of next up, future 1, future 2, future 3. So it's very clearly prioritizing what needs to be done to accomplish this project. But given any week, you're going to ensure that any active project has at least one, if not 2 or 3 active tasks assigned to it. Now, those due dates can be a month out. They don't have to be this week. But if it's assigned a due date and it's active, the task, then it will automatically roll into your focus action zone dashboard at some point, and it will advance. So that keeps me moving. So weekly, I'm making sure that every project has at least one active task, sometimes 2 or 3. And then I'm reflecting on how I've done in terms of living up to my habit commitment. Which habits and routines am I successfully implementing and which am I not? And then I can have a conversation with myself. What do I have to tweak to solve the ones that I'm not doing? And then there's some basic cleanup, cleaning up folders and stuff. So you have a clean workspace and things are easy and quick to access and implement with. Then monthly, we're going to be reviewing whether we have the right projects set to active. Now, at any time in the month, if you finish a project, you can jump in there and adjust it and add new active projects. But at a very minimum, we're going to reconsider monthly which projects should be the active projects. And then quarterly, we're going to review which of my goals, the measurable, trackable goals, should be the active ones. So there's a process for at each tier of the hierarchy of our tasks, projects, goals, which ones are set to active, making sure that very few are set to active, but the ones that are set to active we're making meaningful progress as we go. It's better to finish a few move on to the next one, then it just spread yourself so thin, nothing progresses.
Okay, so the immediate thing that comes to my mind is it sounds very objective in nature. So the numbers of tasks, the times you've completed. Is there anything in the review that's subjective? So how maybe how you felt throughout certain tasks throughout the month? Was it a good month? Not necessarily objectively, but maybe a personal life influencing business or business influencing personal life. Are there anything in the reviews, whether weekly, monthly, quarterly, that has a subjective feeling nature to it?
For sure. Yes, I'm trying to keep it to the systematic,
Yeah.
more tangible aspects. But yeah, there's reflection time in here, and to the extent, to some on some days, even at the daily wind down, I'll put in some reflections. But certainly on the weekly level, there are some reflections, and then the quarterly level, there's actually a deep reflection. There's how am I feeling about the direction? Is this rewarding to me? Is this meaningful? There's almost it's a partial assessment of what you value and how it connects to what you're actually doing, and a bigger picture, bird's eye assessment of progress in the things that you've identified. But keep in mind, we have the goals that are measurable and actionable. And then above that, we have what I call value goals. So those are outcome goals. Above that, we have value goals. Value goals are our life aspirations, and those are emotional. They are the things that make our heart beat faster when we think about them. They're hard to measure, but it could be like have a thriving business, have a close, loving family. I mean, they're emotions largely, and they're moving targets. Then we'll set a measurable goal. So for having a loving, close, loving family, maybe we'll say, all right, we need to go on 3 family vacations this year, or we need to do certain things. And those are measurable and actionable, but they're serving this more emotional need that you've identified for yourself and something that you want to accomplish as a lifelong aspiration. So many of these measurable, actionable goals are serving a deeply emotional, in fact, all of them are serving some deeply emotional value and aspiration in life. So they're still connected. But yeah, there's also this reflection period on I'm doing all these things. Is this causing anxiety, or is this causing more peace in my life? What is my emotional state? And these are things we can try to quantify. It's an imperfect proxy, but you can give a self rating on a scale of 1 to 10. What's my anxiety level on a scale of 1 to 10? How close, how successful am I at sort of bringing or having a close, loving family? It's a prompt to reflect, even though the number is a bit artificial, but having that prompt is helpful because it's a checkpoint. It forces you to check it, because most of the time we don't check it if there isn't a routine systemic prompt for us to do that on a regular basis. So a few people do, but most of us don't.
Yeah, I do like that, and I wonder in your review, do you have inside of your template? I assume you use templates in Notion, sort of
Of
queued
course.
questions or prompted questions to.
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yep. Yep. And this, a lot of them are more qualitative. They're not properties in the database. If you wanted to really track it, you'd put it as a property in the database. A lot of times it's just a space, again, to be a prompt to trigger that reflection. And the value is the exercise of doing it rather than measuring it over time. Though if you wanted to measure it over time, Notion lets you do that. It's up to the user.
yes, yeah, that's why I wanted to ask the questions about subjectivity, because I know a lot of us, myself included, previously tend to overlook it. It's not that important, but I believe it is. As a final sort of like poke at this idea with regards to journaling, is that one of your habits? And if it is, does it feed into the reflection?
I go through periods where I'm doing traditional journaling, like in prose form. I'm not now, and I haven't been for a while. I'm doing more of a bullet journaling. So I'm hitting bullet points on key things that I'm consistently commenting on in my life, so I can get a bit of a perspective on how it's trending. But I wouldn't call it's not what people typically think of when they think of journaling. It's more bullet points on key aspects of my life. But there are periods of time where I do journal, but I haven't lately.
Okay, yeah, it's just interesting to get a perspective.
But if you want to do that, the system or Notion lets you do it effortlessly. I mean, it's so easy to just, I would do it in my daily tracking. I would just have a toggle in my daily tracking page in the body of it, and I would journal in that toggle. So it's all kept day by day, dated, easy to go back and reflect on at any point.
Yeah, I've seen lots of different versions of journals and notions, endless possibilities.
Right.
Uh,
Again, you're building your own SaaS app. It's not a specific tool for a specific thing.
yeah, oh, I love that. That again moves us on to the next question. I feel like you've read the questions already. um, What does extended cognition mean to you? Now, before you answer, just for clarification, extended cognition is using other either technology, whether that's tech or paper or something outside of your mind to help with cognition. Traditionally, that's seen as building a second brain from Tiago Forte, but not necessarily just that. So, what does extended cognition mean to you, and how do you use it?
Yeah, the knowledge management is just one of many examples. I mean, extended cognition is basically a description more than a title or category, right? You're
Yeah.
extending the power of the mind, the capability of the mind. And you know, it summons this concept of artificial intelligence and how the future will be plugged in with these vast smart thinking machines. But you know, just like robots, we think of robots as these futuristic things, and we forget that dishwashers are robots. ATMs and elevators are literally robots. That's what they are. And so instead of just projecting the extreme hypothetical in the future, let's realize pen and paper is extended cognition, right? The human mind by itself is dramatically enhanced when you combine it with pen and paper. I mean, think of what you can do in terms of mathematics just by adding pen and paper. And then what a calculator adds on top of that. And then what a computer and spreadsheet adds on top of that. So let's not miss the mundane. I mean, we're deep into the extended cognition realm, and we have been for really centuries. So, in fact, the nature of human endeavor just drives us towards it inevitably. It's just the natural, you know, as we try to enhance our physical power with tools and levers and hammers, we're trying to enhance our cognitive ability similarly with tools. Simple as paper, it could even be as simple as using your fingers to count is extending cognition. So let's just put it in context. Steve Jobs famously said that he wants the computer to be a bicycle for the mind, right? Because a bicycle radically enhances the leverage of what you can do physically in terms of transportation from one point to another. He wanted the computer to do the same thing for the mind. That is explicitly what you're talking about here with extended cognition. So it happens at all levels. Now, clearly, Notion and Obsidian and Rome and all these tools and Evernote, all of these extend cognition. So it's just an inevitable natural process. I think what becomes more interesting is what we can do in terms of designing our own systems, the element that we have the most control over, given the available tools to maximize that. And that's why I've developed PPV and why I think Notion is kind of special in that it gives you the most freedom to design your own system. But we're surrounded by extended cognition, and it's a beautiful thing. And let's take advantage of it.
Yeah, yeah. I Andy Clark, when he wrote about the philosophy back in, I think it's 95 or 96, I can't remember the date. When he spoke about it, and I read through it, I was like, oh yeah, but that already exists. Where's the next step? And I think the efficiency of extended cognition is where my mindset went. How can we be more efficient with the tools that we use to extend cognition? Which is where systems theory, systems thinking came to my attention. And you mentioned it earlier. I think it was the first question you brought up systems theory. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what systems theory or systems thinking means to you and how that has impacted your efficiency of extended cognition?
Sure, absolutely. And I've done whole videos on this on the YouTube channel, but let's do a sort of a high level summary. So systems thinking is taking it's it's counter to the way we typically learn and work. So typically the default in our society is to break things down into component parts, learn the components with the assumption that when you add them together, you'll then know the whole. And there's some validity to that. And that's important. It's not one or the other. What I try to teach and emphasize and what I try to do myself is take this default approach of understanding the components and then separately think much more holistically, because the thing of interest in a system, the function of the system, doesn't typically exist in the individual component parts. So the magic of the system working together, you won't even have as you study the individual parts. So what you're learning is to recognize cause and effect feedback loops with systems thinking. And so often the causes of the effects that you're trying to understand are in the system that your system is inside of. So every system is a part of bigger systems. In fact, the definition of a system is its role in the bigger system, not the component parts. So each system is a component in a larger system. And we typically focus on a very specifically defined sphere or system and don't think about the context that it exists within. But so often the causes of the effects you're trying to understand are outside of the core system, right? So the cause and effect patterns you can't understand by looking at the scope that you have traditionally been looking at. So the approach of systems thinking is to think more and more and more broadly, bigger systems with encompassing the systems of your primary interest. So you want to understand these cause and effect patterns by looking much larger at the context that it's in. So if you're designing a knowledge management system, you have to think about the life, the rest of the life that it exists within. That's why it's valuable, I think, to have a life and action management system inside the same platform and connected with the knowledge management system. Of course, your life system is part of your family operation, and your family is itself a system. Your neighborhood is a system that your family operates within. Your family's life operates within the context of the larger system of the company that you're employed by in the local economy you're part of. And that local economy is part of the national economy, which is a part of the global economy. Each of these are systems within systems. So the practice is sort of a mindset, a philosophy of looking at the world at this level of system that you can comprehend. At some point, you get to a level of complexity, you just can't grasp it. So you want to keep increasing and look at the cause and effect patterns at a larger scale than you traditionally have, get a grasp of that, and then increase it to the next larger system. So that approach to thinking is going to give you a much larger understanding of the drivers of the results that either you want to achieve or you're trying to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's why I've got space.
Yeah,
it's my mental metaphor for systems, because
it's exactly right.
yeah, you got the organism or person or whatever on the planet, and then the planet builds up and solar systems, etc., and it grows.
It's
That's
entirely fractal. If you look at fractal patterns, you can zoom in or you can zoom out and you see the same designs, the same patterns recurring over and over again at all levels, at all scales. It happens in our behaviors. It happens in everything.
yeah, it's actually part of my research into my PhD and looking at how systems theory, not necessarily isolated from cognition, but how it can relate to learning and skill acquisition with the varying approaches, which we won't get into now because there's a lot of them. Uh, uh, so yeah, so moving on to the last question, which is around knowledge management, which you sort of leaned on a little bit. I'm curious because you used to use Rome Research and you moved back to Notion. I assume, listening to what you've said on social media and answer to previous question, the reason you moved back to Notion is because you wanted the knowledge in your system. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. I mean, to be fair, I was never as deep into Rome as I was into Notion. So I do know the tool Notion better than Rome or Obsidian or these other tools, though I am interested in these other tools and they're fascinating and they're so cool. So I love the innovation happening beyond Notion. Um, and so that's all great. The biggest problem was to have a separate system, and all of these are early stage and none of them have good APIs, if any API at all. So they can't communicate with each other. So I needed to bridge the gap and it was just too much work. I love the link-based network thought. You can do it in a lesser way in Notion to some extent, but it's so much more elegant in Rome and in LogSec and in Obsidian. So I played with it to see how I could do it, but it was just too much maintenance to maintain two separate systems. So that's why I went back to Notion. And again, the ability to resurface in context. So you can resurface in context in those knowledge management apps within the knowledge topics that you're tracking, but you can't resurface in terms of the projects that you're doing, the clients you're serving, the content you're creating, any other context, any dashboards that are on focusing on a slice of your life, which I call pillars in pillars, pipelines, and vaults. So I've got all these windows and dashboards that need to pull in all the relevant information and actions happening in that slice of my life. And once you have, especially something as important as knowledge management in a separate component, essentially a siloed component, it's not informing the core system and can't resurface in that context. So it's a trade-off. There are circumstances for sure where losing that is worth the benefit to somebody, not to me, but to other people who prioritize other things that those tools do particularly well. But it's a big trade-off if the rest of your life is in one system and otherwise is all connected and systemically informing each other. So it wasn't worth it for me, given how much I value that connectivity. But I can see the appeal of it for sure.
Yeah, so something I was listening to your Building a Second Brain Summit presentation, which was really good, by the way. I believe it's going to be up on the Tiago Forte's channel at some point soon.
There's a link. It is available unlisted. It's on my homepage on YouTube. It links to it. It's an unlisted posting at this point. I mean, as all of them are.
Yes, yeah. Well, I've got notes on them already because I watched them all live. And something that came up in my mind when I was listening to the talk and your answer just now is the ratio of action versus knowledge. Because I feel like some people are much more knowledge focused rather than actions. Their time is spent inside thought, inside theories and concepts, myself included, rather than the actions and projects. And I feel Notion leans heavily towards actions and projects rather than knowledge, and the tools for thought more the other way. Would you agree or disagree?
I would. I agree with parts and disagree with parts. So I agree that some people lean more towards knowledge and don't need as elaborate an action management system, and some people need both. Everybody needs knowledge, although most people. I mean, I'm running a business, but my work is heavily based on thought. So I'm deep into both. I need the combination. The disagreement is that I don't think that Notion leans away from knowledge. I think Notion is phenomenally good at knowledge management. And I think these other tools, Obsidian being the currently most popular, is phenomenally good at knowledge management. I agree that Notion is much better at action management and project and task management than any of those, because those are note-taking apps. Like they're specifically for that tool. Whereas again, Notion is a development platform to build your own. So there are pros and cons to Notion as a knowledge management tool, but there are many pros. And one of the biggest is the interconnectivity with the rest. But it also has it has all the structure you want, but also all the fluid dynamic interrelations that you want as well. You can still do endless linking within a Notion database, but then you have a structure so you can find it if you're having trouble finding it with search because you can't remember the right keywords. You know what I mean? So, but I also think the others are very good at knowledge management. I certainly give them full credit for that, but I do think they're not that great at action management. So, a couple different caveats. But if their world is based on knowledge and thinking, then they have fewer requirements for the platform and they can go to a specialized tool just for that. But there's no specialized tool at everything except kind of Notion because it's a development platform, not a tool with a specific objective. So you can build your own tool. That's what's unique about it. But you can build a phenomenal knowledge management tool. In PPV, we have a Vault system, which is the entire knowledge management system. And it's exceptional because you can capture, you can distill, and then better than anything else, you can resurface in context because the rest of your context is under the same umbrella. So to me, that makes it the winner for my needs. But I have a lot of moving parts in my life. So some people don't need as much, and that's okay, right? So if you just need knowledge management, there's a tool just for that, and you'll get started faster on a tool built with a specific application in mind. It definitely takes more time to start up on a development platform. That's why there are systems like mine that get you started, but then you obviously want to customize for your own needs.
Yeah, yeah. I guess one question. This is a personal curiosity from my end onto you. So I used Notion quite extensively previously with knowledge, and I guess my friction point the main friction point when it comes to knowledge was being able to reference the same block in another page. So, for example, the definition of something, or my personal expansion or depth of understanding around a topic or concept, I wanted to reference that elsewhere, and I struggled doing that inside of Notion. So, this may be a technical answer or a technical question. How do you address that inside of Notion? Do you have a page for a concept?
Well, as I'm sure you know, because you know Notion very well, you can link to a block in another page. So the issue there is it just takes longer than it does in Obsidian, right? So you have to go there, copy the link, paste it. So how important is it? So if it's I do that a lot, but it's got to be important enough to take the extra minute to do that. And then of course there are synced blocks, as of course you know very well. And synced blocks are sort of the ideal way. You can update either block. You see the content in both, and anywhere you update it, it updates across all of them. So unless I misunderstand the question, that seems to be a pretty direct solution to that.
Yeah, yeah,
It just takes a little bit longer to set up.
okay. That's the solution that I had in mind, and it's the one that I choose not to do because of the friction points of having to make so
Yeah.
many sync blocks.
Yeah. So if you're working in Obsidian, that's going to be like way faster. And Rome, I think he has even more capabilities in that regard. So it's trade-offs. But I find taking an few extra seconds to do something, uh, but having it everything resurfacing and connected in the way you want it pays off in multiples. So I just find it can take a little bit longer to capture something in Notion and tag it so it resurfaces than in Evernote. But of course, in Evernote, I'm never going to see it again. But that few extra seconds, it becomes valuable on a much higher level because I'm going to see it. Not only am I going to see it again, I'm going to see it exactly when I need it, where I need it. So to me, it's worth that. I don't do an inbox that I sort at the end of the day because the 15 minutes of processing my inbox is so agonizingly boring to me. I hate it. I'd rather spend an extra 2 or 3 seconds at the moment of capture, and that's all it takes. But yeah, some people are like, I want to move so fast, 2 or 3 extra seconds is way too much. Okay, I get that. But what I get in return for putting in an extra couple, in really a few seconds to tag, done, is this system that fuels and empowers me on a whole nother level than if it weren't tagged and connected at the point of entry. So, for each, they have to evaluate the pros and cons of the cost and the benefit.
I guess as a last question on the notes, then, do you write, as in write, not necessarily full documents, but your exploration of a concept inside of Notion, or are they just bullet pointed ideas or thoughts around something? How in depth are those notes?
Okay, so that's a great question. So this is the vault section of Pillars, Pipelines, and Vaults. We have a media vault where we're capturing any kind of media coming in. We have our notes and ideas where we're capturing my own thoughts. And those are all linking to topics in the knowledge vault. The knowledge vault is the aggregation and ultimate culmination of knowledge in the vault system. So the knowledge vault is by topic, the topics that are interesting to me or valuable to me. Media vault is each entry is a separate piece of media. Notes and ideas, each entry is a separate thought or idea. And then they all resurface in the relevant knowledge vault topics. So I open the toggles, I've got embedded databases, linked databases that are self-filtered for that topic. And then I've got the body underneath. So in the body underneath, if I'm coming to do some work or I'm going to make a video or write an article or go to a meeting on a certain topic, I'll open that topic and I'll do my thinking in preparation for that, whatever that expression or output is in that topic. So each time I have to do something related to that, I'm building on it. So building on it could mean I'm just working on it, bringing in new ideas. Maybe I'm Google searching, bringing in articles, clips, my own notes on it, or anything that I previously captured that are in these embedded self-referencing databases. I'll either drag to remove them out of that and bring them into the body of it, or I'll alt drag and make a copy of it. And then it's either a subpage, a toggle, or I could just bring in parts of it. And I'm bringing in things I've captured and things I've entered from my own thoughts that are tagged to it and building out this final aggregation of my thinking on that topic. So I'm constantly doing that. And every time I have some type of work or curiosity on that topic, I'm adding more to it. Adding could be organizing what I already have or adding new thoughts. Either way, I'm building it. So over time, each of these topic items are becoming more and more valuable and I'm expanding on it, but it's all in one place and it becomes a dashboard on that topic. So I'll have sub pages, I'll have toggles, I'll have embedded elements and I'll have visual design to it so that it has that memory palace kind of artifact feel, that tangible feel. Our minds work better with spatial relationships. So I'm building up memory of what's in there too. So I'll work on it as needed. I don't just go on a set time every week and work on my knowledge vault. I do it as I need to deliver something or to come up with something on that topic. but I'm pulling, aggregating, and then anytime in the future I want to work on that topic or create based on that topic, the last thing I did and everything I've done previously is already developed in there. So it's an ongoing work in progress always, but I'm building the thoughts, I'm adding my interpretations, I'm clipping the highlights and quotes that I found most insightful all in one context.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I can see it all in my head about how I do that in Obsidian, and it's just different process. I was
Yeah.
actually talking with someone earlier, and we have almost identical processes, but they're in Logsic. I'm in Obsidian, and small changes, but same
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. It's most important that you have a tool. That's first and foremost.
Yeah.
And then we can debate which tool works in which context best, but start with something, right? And then at the same time, you don't want to be jumping constantly. Like there may actually be better tools, but it's not worth the transfer cost, right?
There's a lot of hassle going between tools.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so obviously your system is always developing, and all of the information that's coming out about tools and stuff is always evolving. I will leave a link in the description to your YouTube channel. Is there anything else you want to add before we end the conversation?
No, just note that. So the YouTube channel is sort of the do-it-yourself version of my system. It's now expanding beyond the system into the psychology and human aspect. So part of the system is the Notion system, and part of it is the human behaviors around it. So we're now moving more and more into the human behaviors, but the core of the system, the Notion system, is there, and that's sort of the do-it-yourself approach. And then the course is the faster, more hands-on with a community and direct support from me and my team. So there are two approaches to implement that. If you're curious, that's at yearzero.io. And I'm happy to answer questions and engage with anyone, primarily on Twitter, where I'm at August Bradley.